Welcome to the Phygital Dish, where we serve up fresh insights on how technology is bridging the gap between physical and digital, creating seamless and personalized interactions for businesses and consumers alike. Let's dig in. Hey, Court, how's it going today? How we doing today?
I'm doing well as I can be in the freezing cold weather and everything else going on. But I'm in my cozy office right now, so I'm all good.
I was gonna say I'm not sure when everybody will get to hear this, but I will tell everybody right now. Although I am wearing a short sleeve shirt, that is because I have a space heater because it is sub-zero here in the Lincoln, Nebraska area. So. If we can break the cold and get into spring, I'd be okay with that. Yeah,
it'll be 80 tomorrow, I'm sure. So
that's right. That's exactly right. We can hope, right? We can hope.
Right.
So
right.
Hey, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's kind of next to our day-to-day business, but it's something we're familiar with at SageNet, which is this idea of mergers and acquisitions. In technology, so I've been kind of recapping. I can't believe how fast 2025 is going, but also just thinking about the past 18 months and the past few years. Mergers and acquisitions are something that happen. Sometimes they happen with a lot of pomp and circumstance, and sometimes they kind of fly under the radar and people don't really notice that they're going on.
But how did that
exactly
happen?
Literally. But I think as I was thinking about this topic, I realized there's a lot going on in digital, and there's a lot going on in near digital transactions, right? Digital signage and also analytics and whatnot. Are you seeing the same things in your world over on the cyber side and network side?
Oh man, it's always musical chairs, on the network and cyber side. There's, with very few exceptions, there's not a lot of organic growth in this industry. It's in a pay to play. I mean, a lot of times this is you really like a technology that's out there and you can either go build it or you can go buy it. Well, if somebody's already got something really good and you got that budget for the acquisition in there, you're going to go buy it. And, we've seen a lot of that in the tech industry. Some gone well, some has not gone so well, but
some just haven't gone, right?
Some just haven't gone. We can chat about that a little bit too. But yes, in the tech, especially in the cybersecurity industry, but in the network industry as well, those are a little more established. But there's acquisitions everywhere every day.
Yeah, and I think that's it's such a great precursor. You talked about that idea of maturing a technology that's already really good. Right. I think that's a real key to these environments. I think also, though, as engagements become more and more complex with customers, there are requirements to be able to fill out your portfolio. Right?
Sure.
Their customers come to you looking for more than they might have looked for previously.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting conversation from the perspective of what's the right thing to buy or what's the right thing to build. And then when does one of those acquisitions go sideways, right? When does one of those where you buy it and you go, whoa, that wasn't quite worth it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
and I would think, if you think about our space, we provide products and solutions to customers that are from all these different partners and OEMs out there. So in a way, we're kind of doing this. We're acquiring this, technology into our portfolio to make sure that we can provide X solution for a customer. So, we're kind of a broker of technology in that way. It's interesting. It's happening everywhere.
It is. So, well, let's dive into some of that from the digital perspective, right? Let's do a little main course here. So, one of the interesting things that really caught my eye, I think it's the reason this topic floated to the top for me, was in the first 2.5 months, or not even 2.5 months, month and a half of 2025, we've actually seen three fairly major announcements come from the digital world. And some of those come in the form of direct acquisition over in Europe. Feels like it's a long ways away, but it's really not. StrataCash picking up SNED. This is an organization that they picked up that's in pharmacy. It drives some of that business that's around LED. We've talked about the growth of LED and direct view LED at retail. It expands the greater portfolio of StrataCash. I was doing a little research before we talked, and I knew it had happened, but you talk about those ones that fly under the radar. StrataCash announced two acquisitions in the span of a week in 2024. They bought Dot to Dot Media and they bought Masterpoint right at the same time. I mean, literally within a week of each other, a few days were the announcements. It's one of those, the Masterpoint one, really kind of flew under the radar, whereas Dot to Dot, much closer to home in Canada, but also someone that's been known in that programmatic space and ad serving space, and also just general digital signage space. But you think about StrataCash making this announcement early in the year of SNED, and really, like, what are they doing with it? They're expanding that Scala footprint. They're expanding where they're going in Europe. That makes sense, right? That's a pretty complementary.
Yeah, I mean, is it so? Would you say on those, and maybe it different for the other ones? Is it to gain access to a technology footprint that they didn't have before, or gain access to a customer base that they have before? Maybe a little bit of both. What are you seeing as kind of the reasons behind that, and maybe just specifically in this case?
Yeah, I think for them in this case, it's really about gaining a deeper positioning in that highly fractured European market. And creating specific space for them with more LED footprint, because that is really driving a lot of the market. And second to that, driving into an area that we know is growing in pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
And in the European market, that's a much smaller footprint, right? You do have a few that are out there, Boots and whatnot, but you don't have the massive Walgreens, Target pharmacy footprints. You have much more pharmacias, right? In the Spains of the world and even UK, driven these smaller footprint areas, and how does digital drive in those spaces? So I think it's really gaining market space, not only in a fractured market, but also in some of those core areas where they're seeing growth. One of the other ones, though, if you flip the coin, right? They went across the pond to Europe, but Europe also is coming to the United States in this conversation.
Oh, the invasion.
And that, in that experience, right? Zero In, provider out of New York city area, was acquired by Trison. And Trison, a European Spanish-based company, been a major flex in the digital world for many years. They've done really great work in the automotive space and in pure retail. They saw an opportunity to find their way to the North American market through this acquisition, right? So you're seeing the opposite side of that scale.
Yeah. So I guess let me, what you've told me and what we've seen over the last couple years is a lot of times we see the innovation, like what's next happening in Europe and on that side. And so I would think that a European company probably already has the IP and where the markets are going. Was that more of a breaking in, just trying to get into North America? They were stuck in Europe essentially.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we, I think, forget because we're in it every day, the North American digital signage market is very large, partially because of just the size of the continent, right? Of North America in general, and part of it because of the expansive nature of the US retail market
Mm-hmm.
and US QSR market, it really gives them the opportunity to look for business that is potentially as large or even substantially larger than what they might find in
Right.
Europe. But in reality, selling from Europe into the US is difficult and vice versa. And so having that physical footprint here in the States, I think is probably the major driver behind an acquisition when I look at someone like this, where Zero N has done very well in the market space. They've made a footprint for themselves, specifically in some areas around fitness, but also in some QSR and retail space.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes a very good footprint with a growth path for someone like Trison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, in my space, it's less about, buying into a geo market space and maybe more
Sure.
into a sub market space of technology. So, the technologies that we're talking about, if you think about like a Fortinet or a Cisco or a Palo Alto, they're pretty ubiquitous global technologies. They're not
Sure.
necessarily having to buy into a market, but there may be a
Yeah.
certain thing. If we're talking about filling out the RFI sheet, do you do this? Well, we don't
Right.
yet, but we'll go buy somebody that does or build it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's more about that. So if you look at the different ways that that's done, a Palo Alto may go and they've made some very large ones. Acquisitions of a specific technology. Their the cloud technologies or their SD-WAN technologies, right? The CloudGenix type stuff. They make
Yeah.
large, just wow, this makes a splash acquisition, and then they go upper right of quadrant, or they've significantly
Right.
moved
Oh
themselves
yeah.
forward.
Sure.
Versus
Sure.
a Fortinet, who is they're not going to buy the giant companies, but they're going to buy a good idea, right? It's we're gonna try to
Oh
mature this
yeah.
into our 50 plus whatever product line, but it's not going to make that
Yeah.
giant splash. So it's more of a
Uh huh.
we want to make a splash. We want a matured technology. We're going to do that over here versus a Fortinet who does a lot by organic, but then they'll buy a company and then mature it into their product line. They're buying the idea
Yeah.
versus buying the
Yeah.
company, and so but it's less
Yeah.
about geo, right? It's sometimes it is about I want to buy that existing customer base. I
Sure.
do want that because it's a it's a hyper competitive market. There's a lot
Yeah.
of there's a lot of these companies out there, but sometimes they get this beachhead in a certain industry
Yeah.
or a certain
Yeah.
region, right? So they do
Yeah.
want to buy that customer base out of there while also taking the benefits of the technology. We've seen that in the Palo Alto space, the Fortinet space, especially the Cisco space. If we talk
Yeah.
about Cisco, they've been doing that for a number of years. They've
For
done it with tons of
years.
different
Yeah.
technologies.
Yeah.
Splunk being one of the most recent
Right.
ones. And
Right.
we get into this, we get into this. Man, I hate that they bought my darling company or whatever. You have these ones that it's like leave them alone, and a lot of people
Yeah.
were like that when
Yeah.
Cisco bought Splunk because Splunk was this fast moving darling technology. It was super agile, and a lot of dev teams and everything loved using it. And I'm not saying it's dead. It's obviously still out there, but everybody got this notion of crap. Cisco just bought them. Now what's going to
Yeah.
happen with it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You see that. You saw the same thing with VMware and Broadcom.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just one of those. It's like don't buy my company, don't buy my
Uh huh.
company. But
Uh huh.
I look
Yeah.
at things like there was a multi-factor technology, authentication technology that I used a number of years ago called Duo, and Cisco
Okay.
bought them, and everybody thought it was just going to go down in the dumps. This is going to be ruined now. It took a couple years, but now it's actually come back, and it's good, right? It's a good
Oh,
technology, and
that's
now it has the
awesome.
backing of Cisco. But there's some
Yeah.
of those that don't happen. There are horror stories.
Yeah.
The Broadcom
Yeah.
VMware thing kind of comes to mind of how that
Yeah.
whole thing is and isn't working. Salesforce,
Uh
acquiring
huh.
or Salesforce
Salesforce.
acquired Slack, and it
That's
was
right.
Cisco that acquired Splunk, and so it's all
That's
of
right.
these
Yes. Yes.
Slack, Splunk.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Right.
it's
Right.
do you want the company to be bought? You think you're going to get all these resources from the larger one, or is it
Yeah.
just going to die on the vine? I don't know. So you kind of walk that tightrope in the tech industry. But yeah, I mean, it happens every day, all the time. You're not going to probably go a day without some tech company announcing a merger, or we're going to go
No.
acquire somebody else.
Well, and I think you hit on something interesting, which is, the two that I kind of started with probably show some of the I don't know that I would say lack of maturity, but I would say lack of breadth of the market from a global perspective in digital and digital experience, right? It's still fairly centralized
Hmm.
by country or continent or such. Whereas some of the things you're talking about, these broader technologies, they're already rooted, the Fortinets of the world are already rooted globally. And
Hmm.
so, how are they enhancing their greater platform? And I think that actually is directly in line with one of the biggest acquisitions that's come up in the market recently, and it kind of transfers between both of our worlds, which is the Vistar Media acquisition by T-Mobile.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is they're really saying, T-Mobile in that scenario is saying, hey, we know that online media sales, mobile, web, in-store, otherwise, retail media networks, what there is interest here. We are going to expand our portfolio. We're already globally known. We're
Yeah.
already set in the market, but we have this gap in this space, and we believe that's the marker. And oh, by the way, it's the marker to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So now,
There's
now
that
we'll
little
see
part
if it
there.
actually
Yeah, yeah,
translates,
yeah,
right? We'll
yeah,
see if it
yeah,
actually turns into something of value to that environment for both organizations, right?
yeah,
You have to capitalize on both those organizations. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think the biggest one that I can think of in my space, and I'll actually kind of take it another direction of it's halted right now is HP, which acquired
Oh,
Aruba a number of years ago, put in a bid
yeah.
to acquire Juniper Networks, and everybody thought that
Sure.
was going to go through, and it was kind of like, why this doesn't really make sense. HP just
Uh,
bought Aruba, now they're trying to buy Juniper, which had some other acquisitions that they've done. So it's just this chain of
right,
acquisition. But
right.
recently the Department of Justice put a stop to the $14 billion merger acquisition here, and it's there's kind of questions being asked of why is this
Right,
creating a monopoly, or there's a
right,
lot of questions
right.
around it. So it's one of those where they don't always go through good. It's a great idea. Are you trying to do it for market share? Are you trying to do it for IP? And then so
Yeah,
you have other people looking at it, like the Department of Justice, saying, "Hold on, let's take a look." They actually sued HP to stop that from happening, and so now it's basically
yeah,
in halt. So you've got
yeah,
the ones where they buy the small ones, you got the one where they buy the big ones, and then you got the ones where they're so huge, it's like we got to get a second set of eyes on this and see.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
everything's probably above
yeah.
board, but it's like when it's that big, $14 billion, it kind of creates
Right.
a pause. We got to stop and take a look
Exactly.
at it. Yeah.
Exactly. So to that extent, let's go the other direction. So if you
Hmm.
think about, although very impactful to those organizations that are smaller that get acquired in certain different ways, right? Whether it's VC or PE
Yeah.
or even by another organization who keeps them holistically intact. Are there technologies out there in the cyber world or in some of those cursory technologies that you're seeing being acquired or being funded maybe to be the next step?
Yeah, I, I think a lot of it is in the cloud. So like
Yeah,
cloud
interesting.
security, AI
Yeah,
guardrails, LLM guardrails,
yeah,
things like
yeah.
that.
Oh, LLM
You know,
guardrails. Yeah, that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, so a lot of that we've seen great IP, and then that being purchased up, and those are kind of easy to integrate, right? Because those,
Mm-hmm.
by nature, they
Mm-hmm.
are. I think just flipping on its side for a second, that the challenge we've often seen is when a large organization buys a smaller thing for a good idea, inevitably you see, three things happen. You see the price gets increased immediately for it because now you got a name associated with it.
Yeah.
The integration challenges are you buy it day one, and you I know firsthand how hard it is to integrate anything, right? And so,
Yeah.
integrating back into this gargantuan system day one, it's like, great idea. Give us 2 years to see where it goes.
Yeah.
And then during that
Yeah.
time, it loses its focus. Before,
Uh-huh.
that was the only thing that company had to focus on. So it was, pipeline sprints every couple of weeks. And now it's, do we get an update every year or two? So that's
Yeah.
that other side of it. But, I think, the ones that are easier to do are the ones that are natively built for integration, that are fully cloud, like they're built
Yeah.
on an extensible platform that scales, it's fully API driven. Those ones are
Yeah.
easier to do. And then I think anything that is all about collecting and sharing data, because we can always find
Oh.
interesting ways to use data. So agents or things that are out there on
Yeah.
devices, endpoint
Yeah.
detection and response, that type of stuff. Those are, or just any tools that is looking at and analyzing traffic in interesting ways to, create
Sure.
analytics and dashboards. So anything that's, getting data is
Yeah.
also easier to integrate because you can always find interesting ways to use data. But it's the monolithic type stuff, the hardware based things, the proprietary networking mechanisms. Those are hard to acquire and then integrate because it's like you've got this product, it was good all by itself. When I acquire it, what are you going to change? It was already
Yeah.
working. So
Yeah.
those where it
Yeah.
becomes that's where it becomes a little bit of a challenge.
If people listen to the Phygital Dish long enough, they're going to think we script this, but I can tell them somehow you led me right into that path of the acquisition of data, and I think part of the reason I asked that question about smaller companies and getting better or funded or otherwise is kind of the last piece of my list was someone that is very well known in the digital industry and in Novori Labs out of Switzerland and headquartered U.S. side in Montreal or North American side in Montreal. They were just acquired by a group out of Germany, and it's a funding source, but it's not PE, it's actually VC. But what's interesting about it is I think the value proposition there, if you read the commentary and think about some of the things you just said, one of the areas that is becoming such a core focus in the digital industry is analytics data, whether it's sensor based or whether it's video based or otherwise. And Navori has been one of those folks on the upper edge of the leadership path to say, hey, digital and video analytics live together. We were talking about Stratacache a few minutes ago. They, back in 17, 18, I don't remember when it was exactly, they bought Walkbase, right? Which is this overseas company regarding analytics data and capturing customer data. These types of platforms now are transforming the way you attribute that data path, and you make that something of more value to the retailer or to the customer, or to the QSR or otherwise. And I think you're right about that. Is how do those companies get acquired in a way that allows them to become even more powerful long term?
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's a really, in my opinion, that's actually much more exciting than, to your point, oh, my favorite technology just got consumed by some mammoth.
Yeah.
Right, and it's gone now.
Well, I think to kind of close us out on this, I want to go a different direction on it and
Sure.
think about kind
Yeah.
of what I see is a little bit of the future of this M&A, where we're talking about these OEM partners and things acquiring. I came from a restaurant space where restaurants acquired other restaurants to create this giant,
Sure.
gargantuan restaurant. But
Yeah.
think about this. One of the interesting things right now is, especially in the restaurant companies acquiring technology companies. So if you
Yeah.
if
Oh, yeah.
acquiring IP, so they're becoming technology organizations
Oh.
themselves, right? So yes,
Yeah.
they rely on partners and partnerships and everything else out there, but sometimes if they're using a technology and they're leveraging, leasing it, buying whatever from a company, why don't we just buy it? And now it's ours. And so we've created our own IP up around this. You've seen this a lot in the restaurant space around, drive-through AI, natural
Sure.
language learning and processing, things
Right.
like that. You've seen a number of organizations, including
You
Taco Bell,
have.
Wendy's, and others,
Yeah.
talk about these
Yeah.
things. And some of
Yep.
them are acquiring or at least putting a very big vested interest, right,
Sure.
financially in
Yeah.
these technology companies. So it's interesting that we've seen it's not just the technology players in the space that are able to do this shuffling. The traditional customers, the end user organizations
Yeah.
themselves are now becoming technology buyers and acquiring IP because that's a competitive advantage. If this is a really great idea, I don't want anybody else to have that. Let me just acquire that. So
Exactly.
we're seeing some of that now.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. And McDonald's goes in that same category, right? They bought a solution a few years ago, or at least invested heavily in a solution a few years ago. What's interesting about that commentary is not only does it change the landscape of how does that technology set itself apart? Right? For the value, are they setting themselves apart for a mammoth to buy them or for them to get funded in a different way? Or are they setting themselves apart because a brand does have the wherewithal to be able to acquire them? But I think the other thing it does is how does the rest of the technology provider landscape then become how do they work in that environment, right? How do you walk in and say, I still create value for you, even though you have this piece, we're going to live with, we're going to live alongside that, and we're going to be able to do these other things. And so how does the customer journey become more powerful in that scenario?
Yeah. That's a good place to close it. I think it becomes more powerful that you have to, prove why you were valuable in the first place, but also make sure that when you say you can integrate, when you say things are seamless and don't have friction, don't have friction.
Exactly.
Make it seamless, right?
Yep. Yeah. And if we know, go ahead.
No, I say, and so long as I don't see something where like Pepsi's going to buy Coca-Cola, I'm kind of fine with everything else going on. I mean, we can deal with it, but if that ever happens, I'm out.
Then we got a different conversation. Well, I think we've learned one thing from this: change is inevitable. We just hope our favorite brands don't go away, but at the same time, M&A will come and go, and we'll see what comes of 25 and beyond.
Absolutely. There's going to be more headlines, and I'm sure we can probably fill another couple episodes with the headlines that come out of this year and the next. It's going to be a crazy couple of years, my friend. So appreciate sharing some time with you and chatting with you on this. And until next time, thank you.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Court.
Thanks for tuning in to the Phygital Dish, where the physical and digital worlds collide, transforming businesses and the consumer experience. We hope today's episode left you full with insights you need to stay ahead in this evolving landscape. But don't forget to subscribe, share, and bring your appetite next time for another serving of expert advice and innovations from the intersection of technology and business. Until next time, here's to staying connected, staying hungry for innovation, and keeping it phygital.